Forbes Books presents Leading What Matters Most, the podcast that helps you change behaviors, improve performance, and unlock the potential of your people. Here's Phil Geldart.
Hi, I'm really thrilled today to be able to welcome Tania Boler. She's the founder of Elvie and has a real passion for Femtech. And her work has really been around empowering women through female-first technology. It's earned her and Elvie numerous international awards and recognition, including being named one of Time Magazine's 100 Greatest Inventions. So I'm really looking forward to our chat, Tania. Let's get going. Hello, Tania. It is great to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Phil.
Well, you know, I looked through all your material. It's fascinating. So I'd love you to tell me a bit about your company, your journey, how you started. It looks exciting, it looks novel, it looks innovative, and it looks like it had challenges along the way.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like if you'd met me when I was 18, I had no ambition or plan to start up a tech company, which is what I've done with Elvie. I didn't even really plan to work in the private sector. I had a very clear mission, which I wanted to work in sort of taboo issues in women's health. So taboo issues meaning stuff that nobody kind of really wants to talk about, which I know is not necessarily normal for an 18-year-old. I think for me, it had been very personal. So my mum had been ill and sort of dominated a lot of my childhood and died when I was 15. And I think for me, I had this sense of, trying to understand things and this real sense growing up of, oh my God, there's so many things that affect our health and our bodies that we just don't talk about. And if we could talk about it, we could prevent so much suffering. So yeah, with that in mind, my dream was to go and work at the United Nations. And you can't really get much different from the UN to your own tech startup. But yeah, I basically went to work in the UN. I was working in HIV prevention and sex education and basically found it incredibly bureaucratic and slow to change. And then came back to the UK, was working in sexual reproductive health. And I loved that role. And I wasn't even planning really to leave. And then got pregnant for the first time. And I think probably like many women listening to this, suddenly was like, oh my God, there's so much changing. Not just becoming a parent, but even physically to our bodies, and we don't talk about it. And even though I suppose, I had a PhD, I'd written a couple of books, I thought I knew a lot about women's health, I knew about sexual health. I didn't know anything about pelvic floor health, and suddenly learned about this, huge sort of epidemic, sort of hidden epidemic for women. And the more I researched it, realized there'd been no technology and no innovation, and that's kind of basically seeing that problem and getting kind of incredibly angry and incensed that there was no solution. So I sort of quit my job and started Elvie.
Wow. And so along that way, what gave you the courage to actually take that step? It's a big step to quit your job and chase a dream like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose I was genuinely so blinded with anger and rage that because I'm I'm a scientist by background, right? So obviously I read a lot about this issue. I didn't know much about it, pelvic floor health. 80% of new mums are suffering with this preventable health problem. 10% of women need to go on to have prolapse surgery in later life. And so the more I researched, I just was so sort of, I suppose, angry and befuddled as to why there hadn't been any technology for women. But in terms of the courage, I think, I think I've just always been that type of person who, if I feel very strongly about something, I just go for it. I've always been quite bold. But I think if I look at what was around me, because I always, people often say to me, should they just quit their job and start a company? I'm often like, no, wait a second. There's certain things that make it an enabling environment, right? So I was in a lucky position. Not lucky, but I was already quite senior in my role at Mary Stopes International, which is a women's health NGO. I was director of evidence, strategy and innovation. So as a woman, I knew I'd reached a certain level, and I knew if I took this jump out, I could come back in at that senior level. So it felt like a good fallback position in that sense. I think my father, being a serial entrepreneur, my father had started and failed at many companies, gave me, I suppose, growing up, that sense of being a bit of a contrarian, not necessarily going with establishment, not following expectations and rules. And then I also, I was also a new mum, but I also had a very supportive partner at home. So I think those sort of, it's not just about, I suppose, just being bold and closing your eyes and taking a leap. I suppose being the type of person I was very careful at assessing the risks and assessing, I think as an entrepreneur, when you have a great idea, you tend to think, oh my God, it's going to be huge, it's going to be successful. And you don't plan so much about what if it fails. And I suppose for me, I was able to plan out what would happen if I failed and realize that, why not? So it was a measured risk, I would say.
It's fascinating. If I go back to what you were saying originally, the genesis seemed to be your anger or certainly passion to do something about a problem, as opposed to, well, I just want to be an entrepreneur. Talk to me a little bit about how that passion has shaped the culture of the company now and your determination to actually make a difference in the lives of women.
Yeah, I think because I had that very singular purpose, which was to bring better tech for women. So first off, we recognized that pelvic floor health is a huge hidden epidemic for women. There'd been no technology. We launched Elvie Trainer, which is a biofeedback device. And I think what we've also done quite differently is it's not just a medical device. We actually designed around how, a product that women want to use and they want to talk about. And I think that's also because I didn't come from that medical device background. But then as I went into that area, I realized that actually all technology for women was horribly designed. And that's when but nothing really as bad as the breast pump. And at that point, it's this horrible, cumbersome machine. You plugged it into a wall. And in the time of sort of driverless cars, you think, why have we got such bad tech for women? So it sort of came up with a real what if, like what if we could design something that's so silent, so small, you put in your bra and it does it for you. And the reason I'm explaining this in terms of your question about the culture is I think because we've always been very focused on solving problems for women, that has really, in answer to your question, it's kind of filtered through everything we do, right? So even on recruitment and so on, and especially in the early days when our first product was very taboo because the product goes inside the vagina, right? And a lot of people don't want to talk about that. So we had it's very binary. Some people would be like, oh, this is too taboo. It's too much of a difficult issue to talk about. But the people who would come on board, who would join the company, were naturally grabbed by that sort of mission. So we just recruited, I suppose, people who were very mission led from the start. And that created a homogenous culture. But in some ways, we can talk about this later, it creates also, there's trade-offs, right? If you're very mission-led, it's not necessarily commercial, right? So that's something I sort of learned along the way too. And also how if you're just recruiting people who are there for the women's health and the women's tech, you need to then think about how do we be inclusive and bring in men who might not wake up in the morning and understand or think about women's pelvic floor health issues. And how you make sure you don't become too homogenous even in your thinking, which obviously doesn't foster innovation and creativity.
Fascinating. I know because Eagle's Flight is committed to making a difference in the lives of people, we run into the same problem that often the commercial side will sometimes take a back seat to the mission, and the two have to coexist. So I'd love for you to chat a little bit about how you overcame that hurdle, because you want people in the organization who have the same passion for women's health and innovation that you do, but you also still need to be sure that you're in business to provide that. So as the leader, what were some of the things you are doing and have done to deal with that?
Yeah. And before reconciling this sort of the commercial purpose trade-offs. And I think they're always there, right? And I think I was familiar with them because in the organization I worked at before, when I was director of research and metrics at Mary Stokes, we had a double bottom line, right? It was a Robin Hood model where we were running reproductive health services for women in low-income countries and making a profit, and then using those profits to help highly disadvantaged communities. So I was actually in charge of coming up with what is our metric, which isn't just the profit, but the actual impact, the health impact that we're having. There's always constant conversations about how you sort of how you reconcile the two, because in any reproductive health service or technology, the areas which might have the highest health impact tend to be the least commercial, right? So in that case, reaching women in very rural areas of Bangladesh had the best impact, but was much more expensive than reaching them in urban areas. Or parallel Elvie is some of the most neglected issues in women's health today, issues like endometriosis, polycystic ovaries, are incredibly important issues for women, but because they're very taboo, nobody's talking about them. The commercial opportunity is very difficult. And we have to have, we're being challenged all the time at Elvie, because also we've created a culture which is quite flat, and we model behavior of challenging ourselves openly, because I'm not saying we're perfect at that, but it's so important to do, right? Because otherwise you don't have information bubbling up, particularly when things are going wrong. But we will often be challenged around product development, right? And are we helping the women that we're there to help with our mission? So the way we kind of look at it now is, I remember early days we'd have Post-it notes, because we always focus our product innovation on what problems are we solving. That's the key bit that we start off with. We would sort of stick up lots of Post-it notes around the problems, and then sort of put it into buckets of not necessarily commercial opportunity, but like how quick we can get traction. Because something we've learned along the way is in neglected issues in health, there might be a big need, but it doesn't translate into commercial opportunity because the education is not there. You've got to do the demand generation, right? Call it marketing or whatever. So there are things which you can kind of have working a bit more in the long term. So even us with our current portfolio of products, our breast pump category is by far our largest category, is 80%. Pelvic floor health is having a huge health impact, but it's going to be, we're number one in that category, we're growing that category, but it's going to be quite slow because we're having to sort of get over that.
Educate along the way.
Exactly. So yeah, it's not easy. We haven't got the answers, but ultimately also, and if I'm really honest, the issue I think as a company is, I think, and I say this to other entrepreneurs, right? Sometimes I say to women in Femtech, maybe you shouldn't take VC money, especially if you're working in an issue which I can see, or we can all see, is going to be difficult, and you're going to be there in the long term. Because if you've got to do that education piece, venture capitalist money is not patient enough, even however patient they say they are, patient capital, for you to sort of trial and error and sometimes even there's benefits to doing things in the public sector, right? I could have even done the first product possibly in the public sector, not had that pressure of the commercial side. And so at Elvie, we even talk about some of the work we want to do in terms of impact. And if we know it's not commercial, we're looking at, can we create a parallel strand, which will be a sort of philanthropic strand, right? So in some ways, I think as we scale, the question is, how can you have that impact? And you have a commercial arm where you've got to focus on profit, but within your principles for the mission. And then a philanthropic arm, which is not so focused on the commercial opportunity.
Cool. That's neat. One question I had as I was looking at the product and thinking about it, the idea and the innovation that went behind it and the obvious need that it meets, you still had to get trial and you still had to get people willing to shift to that kind of thinking. And then you had to get enough of them to make it commercially viable. So what was your thinking about how do I actually break the paradigm and help people realize there is a better way, there is a better product, there is a way to actually deal with the women's issues constructively through tech when it's so foreign to the marketplace when you enter it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right? Because we couldn't point to equivalents. There weren't other tech products doing this, which is why investors, we got a lot of rejections at the beginning. And I remember early days, I used to get so stressed around like, oh my God, how are we going to market it? How are we going to sell it? And we were getting crazy responses, right, from retail. Like John Lewis, one of the largest retailers in the UK, was like, oh, it's a bit too taboo. Maybe you need like a QR code and people are going to have to go to a website rather than have, point of display. And actually my mentor and one of my earliest investors who then became my co-founder, Alex Asali, and he'd started Jawbone, right, in California. And there were a lot of parallels, not just the fact that it was hardware, but, Jawbone really created very elegant products. And his point, he kept saying to me, Tania, laser focus, just get the product to fix a problem and it'll do the marketing for you. And obviously it was not that straightforward at all, but I do think that laser focus on solving a problem for women, which had never been solved through tech. And actually, I think we underestimate the female in general, the female consumer of tech, right? At the time, I had engineers saying to me, oh, it's wireless charging. This is 9 years ago. Women are not really going to appreciate that. But ultimately, if you give a woman a piece of tech that really solves a problem for her, especially a problem that she might have been having for quite a few years, we found actually that the uptake was really quick, and particularly the word of mouth, right? So one of our early marketing strategies was seeding, and so we had this wonderful woman called Kedzi and Cecile in New York, and they were literally pounding the streets of Upper East Side. Because my approach was, to your point as well, as like, we didn't want to make it medical. I thought we had to find a way to remove the yuckiness from some of these taboo issues, right? Talking about breast pumping and so on. So for the pelvic floor trainer, my vision was like, can we launch this in spas, in Pilates, in yoga studios, focusing on core strength? And we actually launched Gwyneth Paltrow on Goop, and it sold out within a few hours. But then with the seeding, we were literally going door to door, handing out products, gifting them in New York, and then similarly in West London. And you seed all these products, but you don't hear anything, right? You just don't know if that word of mouth is happening, right? It's not visible. It was not in there. And then one day I was in the office and I got a call just out of the blue. They said, can we talk to Tania? And I picked up the phone, and it was a reporter from the New York Post. And she just said, we want to interview about why everybody on the Upper East Side is talking about Elvie. And I was kind of like, mic drop moments. But it works. Like, women do talk to other women, right? And now we do it in a much more scalable way, right? So we do a lot on social. But I think because we've managed to take quite negative issues, we've created this quite positive brand experience, positive product experience, women love kind of talking about it. But obviously we use traditional marketing too, right? But I would say that word of mouth has been really critical.
Well, I think the nature of the product, if it meets such a valuable need, then your word of mouth will carry the day. But you had to have the courage to do that, because you have to produce the product and you're giving it away for free in the hopes that people are going to jump on. Talk to me a little bit about your desire to go into areas that are more philanthropic, and how perhaps you can make the tech available to countries that might not otherwise be able to afford it. Have you thought that through in terms of sort of a phase that you would want to go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think with any kind of medical devices or health products, the question always is, if you want to make it free at point of access, can you sell it through the health systems, right? And I think a lot of tech companies in our space will tend to go straight for that model. But I think for us, we are sort of part of the new generation of more consumer or personal health, where, yes, we kind of regulate an IP like a medical device, but we've created this sort of consumer brand. So people are buying our product out of pocket. And the Elvie pump, which is the world's first silent wearable breast pump, I'll be honest, the price point is quite high, right? And that reflects the amount of innovation we had to do. But then in answer to your question, we're always challenging ourselves, how can we increase access? So the sort of most obvious way is to get it through the health system. So in the case of breast pump, we've come up with Elvie Stride, which we now sell through health insurance, because in the US, women are given a subsidy under the Affordable Care Act towards a pump. And we're looking constantly, can we get a fully reimbursed pump so that women don't have to pay, so we can really support women with their health requirements across the US. And actually for the pelvic floor trainer, we got initially a supply chain agreement with the NHS, so that's the UK health system. So it's about trying to do that in parallel. And then in terms of the philanthropic side, I think, we have a very active team, right? And we say we're women-led, and even though if you look at it just by numbers, there are more women than men working at Elvie. We're about 200 people. What we noticed when we looked at it is that there were less women in some of those roles, such as engineering. So we sort of realized that we also need to do our bit to try and encourage more young women to go into engineering. So there, it's about working with STEM, working with schools and so on, and trying to think what we can do there. It's very nascent. We haven't done much yet, but that's really a key issue for us as well.
So coming back to the culture and why I'm interested in the philanthropic side and your desire to make it more affordable, because if that is part of what it is that drives the people of the company and is part of your mission, and certainly part of a passion that you share, I would think you have to manage the balance between that and remaining commercially viable, because the folks are in it not just for the commercial value, but they're also in it to make a difference in the lives of women. So it's something that as the CEO, you have to constantly be paying attention to, partly because you're passionate about it and partly because your people are passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just sort of in terms of access, but also the product pipeline. Like, what issues do we focus on next? Do we go with, low-hanging fruit products, which are maybe make more commercial sense, or do we try and support women at different life stages. And we've, I mean, being very honest, if we talk about things which have gone wrong, we've at times when we've gone just for the mission, right? So thinking, how can we help women? And without being able to go into too much detail, but for example, thinking about, okay, we need to help them more with a digital proposition or with instant hormone readings and so on. The problem then also isn't maybe that will fulfill your mission. Maybe it'll have the customer proposition, but maybe it doesn't fit your technical competencies, right? And that's quite a harsh conversation. But ultimately, we have a really amazing engineering and innovation team, and they're really, really, a lot of them are ex-Dyson, and they're just very good at designing consumer-centric connected devices, right? So it's having that kind of open conversation with people as well about those trade-offs too. Just to mention, sorry, you called me CEO, just for clarification. I'm not CEO. I actually stepped down about 18 months ago, which was something I'd planned for a while. Yeah. So we have Michaela Todd. She's our incredible CEO. So I'm founder and president now.
Okay. Sorry, somewhere I picked up that. Oh, yeah. No, my mistake. You are I definitely know you're the founder. But
yeah.
Talk to me a bit about the leaders in your company and some of the priorities that you have for them with an idea to getting the best out of the workforce. One of the things that I'm passionate about is how do we harness the potential of the workforce using the leaders. So what are some of your experiences there? What have you learned? What are some of the opportunities, the ways in which you actually equip your leaders to get the best from your people? What's some of your thinking there?
Yeah, and I think because I was a first-time founder CEO, right, I was sort of always aware of the gaps, in my skill set. Although I think when I look back at what skills were transferred from my last role, is I sort of built and led a team there, and I realized that I'm good at building teams, partly because I think I'm quite low ego in terms of, again, recognizing where my weaknesses are and therefore trying to create that jigsaw team, right? And with that, I mean, I've always hired people. I know people say you should do it, but we have done that at Elvie, like hired people who I'm not scared of it as being better than me or smarter or more experienced, right? But then with that, I also I suppose I give them the respect and the freedom that they need as leaders in order to do great things. I do think proper delegation is an easy thing to say, but I think often doesn't happen. But I think your leadership team does need that, and then a sort of a real sense of, I suppose, pulling together, right? Because it's been, in our business since COVID, being in consumer electronics, it's been kind of a real whack-a-mole of everything going wrong, different things going wrong at different times. And we also have fun together, I think, as a leadership team, because I think that kind of helps, again, when you're sort of working late and so on.
Do you feel that finding the kind of leaders your organization needs is easy or hard, with an idea in mind to how much effort do you feel you're having to put in to equip them to be better once they're on board?
No, we've generally hired very experienced people with a lot of bench strength, because I think also, look, different phases, you need different types of leaders. So maybe if I start with the earlier stages, when we raised our first institutional funding, the first sort of $7 million, we were about, 40 people, about 2 million revenue at that stage. I think like many scale ups, you need to bring in a certain type of leader, I think, who you ultimately want somebody who comes from knowing what great looks like. So somebody from a bigger tech company, but really importantly, not too senior, because at that stage, you really have to be able to flex. So you need somebody who can do the senior level strategic, but isn't going to get too frustrated about the fact that also doing Excel spreadsheets, right? I remember one of our CFOs just saying, she hadn't done so she come to Elvie, she's suddenly finding herself having to check Excel spreadsheets, and she hadn't done that for 15 years in her career. So you need, I think, that earlier stage that you need a certain type of approach to rolling up your sleeves, but also to risk taking. I think I see this across the tech sector, when people often make a jump from a big company to kind of new shiny startup, which seems to be getting good press and so on. They don't also realize there's quite a lot of risk, right? Because one of the problems with a venture-backed loss-making tech company is that there's very little margin, right, when things are going wrong. So there's that motto of hire fast and fire fast. And I do think people coming from bigger companies, which are used to, I suppose, more support structures, can struggle with that earlier stage startup. As we've got bigger, we've definitely gone more for, well, I think we've needed senior leaders with more bench strength. That's partly because there's a lot of complexity to our business, right? We have a global supply chain and so on, and just can't have people learning on the job.
So it sounds to me that you have intentionally... No. But I was going to say, you have intentionally thought through what you need at each stage of the company's growth and gone for the leaders with bring those skills in, as opposed to one size fits all through the life cycle of the company.
Yeah. And including myself, right? I kind of knew. I remember early days, I read this book called Founder's Dilemma by Wasserman. And it's all about, as a founder, CEO, this odd position where you're having to, reinvent your role, even as a CEO, right? At early days, my role was problem solving. There was always a crisis. If there was no marketing, I had to head marketing. If there was no finance, I had to head finance. But as you get bigger, and also with the big push, I think, over the last 18 months in the market, but also we put on ourselves to become profitable, then it becomes, less about all the exciting innovation and more around operational efficiencies. And I knew that was an inevitable part of the evolution of the company. And I also knew that however supportive my board was, however much I could keep training myself, that wouldn't be the right fit for me at that later stage. So absolutely, I think the company, you need different leadership teams from 0 to 30, 30 to 100, 100 plus, 500 plus. And that includes the type of CEO you need.
Fascinating. That's a great, very good insight into sort of who and what you are, what you do and what you don't do, in order to make sure that you're focused on your strengths and not just there and not able to do what you do well. That's interesting.
Yeah, and not just your strength, but it's a great privilege. I know most people didn't have this privileged position I'm in, but actually focus on the things you enjoy doing. That you're learning or you're challenging or whatever. Yeah, everybody has different things. And so I've managed to sort of design my role around that, I suppose. I suppose maybe because I'm so mission focused, right? So even if you ask Michaela, the current CEO of the leadership team, I'm still there as the custodian of the culture and the mission and the vision. And that's the stuff that I'm most passionate about and therefore I'm really good at. But actually, to your point about the trade-offs early on the commercial side, Michaela Todd is incredibly commercial, and the company will, is going to do better, to be honest, on commercial metrics than if I were leading it today.
So I had a conversation recently with someone who was saying that in today's world, leaders are struggling greatly with the concept no longer of work-life balance, but the degree to which life and work are fully integrated, partly because there's so much virtual work, working from home. Life has become more complicated. And how do you actually balance that as an individual? And especially, you're a parent as well as an innovator, as well as, a leader in the company, and you do the tech side, but also making sure that your team doesn't end up working excessive hours and that they find balance in their life, when so much of today's business world seems to be integrated not just with the work and business, but we're worrying about the economy, the social pressures that are on us, the geopolitical pressures, that all of these things seem to weigh more heavily than they used to. So what I'm really after is you're thinking about balance of those things and how you ensure for yourself and your leaders that it stays in balance.
Yeah.
If it is.
It's really hard. It's really, really hard. And I would definitely say, there are many years when I was very hands-on at Elvie and there was no balance. I had small kids at home. And I think if you're making choices in your life, right, and you're recognizing, to your point, you're trying to be a parent, you're trying to be a leader, you're trying to be a friend, a partner, maybe even have your own life. There's certain periods in your life where you actually can't do all of that. So you have to let some of it go. So be quite conscious around which balls you're going to drop. And then the hardest thing is not to have regrets, right? Not to be like, I haven't got a social life or whatever it is. So I suppose for quite a period of time, I knew I just had to focus on work. I did not have that balance, but I knew at some point I would be aiming to get to a position where I could find that more balance. But then even within that period where it's crazy at work, there's, small tricks you can do. Like, I learned along the way, I thought multitasking was a great thing. I used to sort of be pushing off messages whilst trying to look after my toddler, and then realize that you don't do either properly. You probably send the wrong email to the wrong person, and your child really knows when you're not giving them full attention. So I think it is about, I know it sounds quite boring or simple, but boundary setting, right? So actually being quite strict. And I realized, I think like many people who, there's a huge uprise in insomnia, right? So I was sleeping terribly and waking up in the middle of the night, worrying about all the problems at Elvie, and then finding a way again to simple things like genuinely not checking my emails after a certain time, right? I've even removed my inbox now from my phone. You just have to do a few things to kind of, especially, of all the terrible things you talked about, but there's also the situation where there's everything on our phone is constantly, putting us in, giving us that dopamine hit. You kind of want to know what's going on. There's a sort of 24/7 type of way. So I've had to sort of try and reduce that on myself personally. And then the company, to your question about the company, we are conscious, right, that people are working really long hours and now they're working from home. We're very flexible as a company. So therefore the day kind of bleeds into the night a bit. But we also, because we're there supporting, ultimately we're also supporting parents. Our products are supporting parents. It would be very hypocritical, I think, if we weren't, if we weren't walking the walk as well as talking the talk. So we have installed quite a lot of policies which make it much more family friendly. And then around that, basically what we also realize is if you're trying to be inclusive, right, you can't just be, hey, here's loads of benefits for parents. So we've actually, I think we've got I'm very proud actually, Tania Boler, our Chief People Officer, very proud of like a lot of the very flexi working approach that we brought in to try and bring in that balance to your question. So 2 examples actually. One is we now give every other Friday, so 1 Friday a fortnight, the day off. We just say the whole company, we're shutting down. Not key support functions like customer support, but we're saying, okay, we've trialed a 9-day fortnight. So 9 days out of 10 we're working. And actually we haven't seen any drop off in productivity. But then what we also do is we don't want one of those fake days off where people are having to secretly take meetings and so on. So on Slack, people are often posting on that Friday the fun things they're doing on their day off. So people are proud to actually say, I've actually closed my laptop.
Great idea.
What I'm doing, baking a cake, going fishing, and everyone's sharing what they're doing. And then the other key thing is life leave, right? So, rather than we realize like maternity leave and all these different benefits, if you want to be inclusive, we've created this thing called life leave, and people can, whatever it is that's important to them. So you might be caring for an elderly person, or it might be a child, or whatever it is. So I think we're constantly trying to look at ways to also show everybody in the company that taking time off is important, right? And we know that. I mean, you're in the US. I think it's a bit different, right? I think in America, are people still taking very little holiday?
Well, I'm actually in Canada, but we do a lot of our business in the US. People, I think things are changing. People, and that's hence the question that you are bringing an intentionality to it versus just reinforcing its importance or acknowledging it. You're actually trying to do something concrete, which I think is very helpful, because I feel that if we're not intentional, especially as the leadership we provide, it won't happen. So it just work tends to just fill up the space.
And you're right. And I think I'm seeing more and more, people that ask for office, they'll just be putting, I'm taking a break, I'm not on email. They're kind of, people being much more intentional about that too.
Yeah, I know one of the things that we do, a lot of our folks put on their email something like, we are working flexible hours and my workday may not look at all like yours. So please don't feel obligated to respond to the email until it fits to your workday. But again, it's that sort of intentionality of saying, I'm working now, but that doesn't mean you have to be working now. You work when you want and get back to me when you can. But without that level of focus, it just doesn't happen, I don't think.
No, yeah.
So
You're right.
looking into the future, talk to me a little bit about the growth you see for Elvie, a little bit about how you see um, things which could get in the way of your success, either from the culture or the leadership point of view. I'm not really thinking about competition and so on. I mean, you'll have to deal with that, but more from a leadership perspective as you strive to grow. What are some of the hurdles you anticipate that you may run into?
I mean, it's sort of more markets and more products, right? And I think back to your earlier question, I think about risk taking and so on. Something I've learned as a leader along the way is that old adage, strategy is about saying no. It's so important, right? Because when you have a hit product, like our breast pump product sort of became number one in the US within a few weeks. It's been growing like crazy. We couldn't get enough products off the factory line. We've had times where actually we just want to go after every opportunity. And that's kind of my personality too. So what I've learned along the way is I also need people within the exec team who might temper that down, that kind of organizational physics, right? You need a mix of risk takers and people who are less of a risk taker. So I think it's about being very strategic about where we go into. And to bring this to life, when we did a really big fundraise, we went and launched in 10 markets in Europe on the same day. We also tried to launch in China. And I'll be honest, we just spread ourselves too thinly. So I think it's about being really, I think what makes Elvie special is we have a very premium brand. So what I've sort of learned along the way is how we can do this again in an intentional way. And, really make sure that we have solid bases in our two key markets, UK and US, and then how we build that out in other markets as well. But in terms of, I suppose, your question about the leadership team, the kind of risks and so on, I think generally the team is very aligned. There's a lot about execution. One of the hardest things is with hardware is it's a long cash cycle and it's a long development process. So, if you're really innovating and we're out to launch in a third category in a few months, it takes 2-3 years and you constantly have a pressure from investors who are like, why can't you get a product out every year? And so on. But it's about sort of trying to keep that balance, right, of making sure that you're really innovating and coming up with something that's going to really solve a problem for women and a pain point for your consumer and that kind of speed to market as well.
We had an opportunity once to work with a client that was very concerned about innovation occurring at every level in the company, not just in the innovation labs, if you will. Yeah. So is that something you've thought about? How do you encourage every one of the 200 odd folks to come up with ideas, or does it tend to be pretty focused?
Well, funny enough, at the beginning, early days, because you're a tech startup, right? Everybody thinks you should be innovating in everything. And actually quite a lesson and realization that there's lots of areas we shouldn't bother innovating in at the beginning, right? When it's a real pressure, you've got very limited amount of money, limited time to get a product out. There's many areas like HR, legal, operations. That was what I was trying to say about bringing in people with bench strength. We need to just, build from the best and not necessarily innovate. But now, obviously, we're a bigger company, and I can see what your other talker was what they were getting at, which is obviously you do want innovation and you want creativity and you want new ideas from all parts of the organization. I think in order to foster that, it's about, making sure everyone says it, but how you do create that non-hierarchical structure and an environment where people can sort of talk up and down and so on. But I would say at Elvie, one of the things is because we're all about, the product at the center of what we do, we have the flip side sort of issue, which is everybody wants to be involved in innovation, and we have to actually make sure that, what you don't want to get to is design by consensus. So we're quite clear now on when we want people's input, when is the time to innovate and when is the time to step out and let others get on with it. So early days, so we have every week people can submit ideas. So any idea you've got for a problem or a product, you can submit it. But then once, it's almost like I feel like when you get bigger, you have to protect the innovation center. So for us design engineers, to make sure they're given the space to just trial things and to fail. Because when we've gone wrong, it's either because too many people want to be involved in innovation. Suddenly you have finance people and legal, and everybody's got a reason to be in that meeting. So you end up, as I said, with design by consensus, or what happens is too much pressure on the innovation team to be creating PowerPoints and decks, for the management team, and then they find themselves kind of already committing ahead of time. So we are quite careful about the innovation process. We have a very structured process, and we're quite careful about who kind of gets involved when. Is that quite different then to what you've heard from your other speakers?
Well, yes. It's different from what I thought you were going to say, but let me lead to the next thought, which is, do you feel that structured process bleeds into people not feeling empowered in their own functional area? So I may not be heavily involved in innovation around the product side, but does that restriction mean that I'm not to be innovative in just my functional area? Another, how do you balance? Do you see what I'm trying to?
No, I understand. I think we're talking about two types of innovation, right? I suppose I was thinking about product innovation because that's so at the core of what we're doing. Was you're talking about innovation and process and so on, and yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to be encouraging that, right, in every function. I suppose for us specifically.
You were right. I was talking about the product. So I understand your answer. I was just wondering if that discipline around the product has inhibited in the other kind of innovation around the job. That was the.
I would say that discipline around the product comes from a certain type of very process-focused engineering mind. And at times we have run the risk of being too engineering principled, I would say, in our thinking, which I haven't actually seen it reduce innovation, but I've heard an opposite complaint, right, which is it's created too much structure and too much process and things have slowed down, which I suppose in some ways does mean, yeah, I think that is the challenge there, right? And there's one that we've talked about openly, and as a very concrete example, right, because the engineers do have a very structured process, when the marketing team have wanted to come up with some products, they're doing it in a different way, right? So again, it's just about, I think particularly at Elvie, we have very different disciplines, right, with the engineering and then the marketing, because so it's about how to get them to talk the same language and have respect for each other's domains of expertise as well as domains of responsibility. And yes, actually, in answer to your question, I think at times we probably have been a bit too rigid. Apologies to the engineers listening from Elvie.
No, it's good. I think as I'm listening to you, it comes back to where we were a while ago, and that's the importance of a consistent vision around the health and well-being of the women that you're targeting. That it's not about innovation for innovation's sake. It's not about trying to improve process. It's about, we need to be sure that we stay true to why we are in business, which is we want the health of women to improve, the access to tools to improve. And therefore, what do we need to do, as opposed to how do we need a better process? So I'm back to you as the founder and the passion that drove you. That seems to me to be the key to making sure that you don't just become another company and lose sight of that mission.
Yeah, I think that's what makes us special and why we've ended up not just with special products, but also very special marketing. Right, we do quite bold campaigns where we want to go and break taboos, and I think that's because, to your point, that very clear sense of purpose and identity is sort of infiltrated all the different functions at Elvie.
Yeah, as I've listened to you, I think your very clear sense of purpose is at the core of your success. It's that laser focus around, I know what we're here for, and I know how we're going to measure success. If women feel that they've been much better off because of Elvie and the other work that you do, we will have been a success. That is key. And I think organizations that can keep their culture as clear as that is a huge asset. That is a huge asset.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's great. Tania, you have been a pleasure to chat with, and I really appreciate you giving us the time. Thank you very much. And we will make sure to we'll link the website back to the podcast so people can find and buy the product, which would be great, and connect up with you if they wish. So thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I really enjoyed that.
This has been Leading What Matters Most with Phil Geldart. If you want to create a culture that drives performance and develop leaders that inspire and motivate, go to philgeldart.com. Leading What Matters Most is a production of Forbes Books.